Okay. Hello, everyone. Oh, I've lost my- Okay, I'm just gonna.
The microphone closer to you.
Where's the mouse? Where's the cursor? The mouse. I want to go back now to the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I think, can you see it's over there? I think what we need to do is get it out of full screen mode. So now
Okay, great. Okay, hi everyone. I can't see you anymore, but I hope you can see me. I'm Gabriella. I'm not sure why I was asked, but I was asked to moderate this evening. I guess I am a teacher and I do have little children myself. And funnily enough, I do know our South African duo quite well, actually, funny enough. So the first for tonight is Shlomit. First of all, a happy birthday is in order. I'm a good moderator. Secondly, let's discuss that she's qualified as a class teacher and a specialist teacher for children with special learning difficulties, which I actually have personal experience with because as a teacher, Shlomit actually takes out pupils in my class. So I have just seen her exceptional work for myself and the evidence it produces. So I'm really looking forward to tonight because very often we don't really see much of each other and she's just whipping my boys away and I don't see much of her. Gosh, this has got a whole host of training and years of experience that you have, but enough of me babbling on. I think what's best is to hear from Shlomit herself. So without further ado, our first speaker, Shlomit, thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Okay, we've got literally only about half an hour, and it's just going to really be a snapshot of what reading is. Reading is a very, very wide topic, and what I'm going to touch on today is I'm going to look at the neuroscience part of reading. So it's what I feel is very, very important, as the slide indicates, is that we've got to understand what's going on in our brains when children are learning to read. And as teachers, then that can help us with our teaching. Okay, so what we have to understand is what is the purpose of reading. The purpose of reading really is to understand what a message that somebody else has written. That's really what the purpose of reading is. So we're going to start with a little activity. Okay, a little activity. I want you to look at the slide over here. Can you see that there's a few lines at the top there? What I want you to do is I want you to try and read what's written over here. And while you're trying to read, I want you to just think about maybe what is my brain doing while I'm trying to read those lines? And maybe what is preventing me from reading those lines? I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes just to have an opportunity to try and decipher or to maybe read it and read these lines.
sorry, they can't see your screen. Can I just give you a don't know what you want to tell them.
Just bear with us for 1 moment. We're going to try to help you to be able to see what we can see here.
Gabriella,
No.
I want to show you what I'm doing.
Yes.
So it says share screen.
Yep.
Okay. That's not it. And this is what you want to share. There we go.
Okay. So now what I'd like you to do is look at those lines that I've written, that have been written over there. And I want you to just think about what is your brain doing and why you're trying to read those sentences. And in addition to that, what is preventing you maybe from reading those lines? Can I have any?
New to that. The alphabet.
You don't know the alphabet, correct? Okay, 100%. So let's.
Video.
Don't have the tools. You don't have the tools. You don't have the tools. You don't recognize the alphabet. Okay, so if we look and what those sentences actually mean. It's taken from the story, The Hungry Caterpillar, which is a story that is familiar to most people with young children. And what they said, can you read the sentences for me now? Yeah. Okay, so by the light of the moon, a small egg is lying on a leaf. One Sunday morning, the sun rose. So why was it easier to read the English rather than the Russian? Because as Veronique said, was that we actually don't know the code. Okay, so that is very, very important. Every single language has got their own alphabetic code. So therefore, our children have to be able to identify the symbols in our language and be able to associate a sound with those symbols. And that is why reading is very, very complex. I wanted you to do that exercise in the beginning, because I wanted to show you that children who are starting to read, or even children who are struggling to read, what they are actually seeing on a page is a bunch of lines, squiggles, and dots. It's all very unfamiliar for them. So what is very, very interesting, and what neuroscience has taught us, is that our brains are not actually wired up for reading. Our brains are wired up for language. So if you think about when a child is born, what do they do first? They don't start reading. Okay, they start speaking. They start cooing, and then they move on to babbling, and then they start using one word, and then they start moving after the age of 1, then they start onto 2 words, and then 3 words, and so on. Because our brains are wired up for that. So when you were born, that part of the brain, the language part of the brain, that is what we're wired up to do. So reading is a completely new system that we have to build into our children through teaching. It's something that's not naturally there. So as I said before, so therefore, because reading is something that we have to learn, and we have to teach children, children are not natural readers, we're natural speakers. So therefore, skilled readers are made, they are not born. So if we look at the brain, okay, so when a child is born, what is our brain wired up to? The vision part of our brain. So we've got the language part of the brain, which sits like in the front of our brain and to the middle, and our vision part of the brain sits at the back of our brains over here. So that part recognizes objects and recognizes faces, which makes sense. So when a baby is starting to talk, they recognize their parents, it's mama and dada, and then they're able to name objects because that's what our brain is wired up to do. Our brain is not wired up for reading. So therefore, children who are on what we call natural readers, those are the children, once you've taught them, they will be able to pick up the sounds effortlessly. But those children who are struggling with their reading, it takes a long time for them to become efficient and proficient readers. Okay, so what I've got here is a slide of a non-dyslexic brain and a dyslexic brain. So what is going on when we're teaching children? So if you look at a non-dyslexic brain, as I said to you before, the language part of our brain is the front over here, the Broca's area and the parietal temporal area. That part is associated with articulation, of meaning. So that's what we're born with. That's what everybody's born with. We are born with a vision, obviously, vision side of our brain, because that's for recognizing objects and faces. Okay, so what happens is to a dyslexic child, is if you look, their brains are completely wired up, totally different. The structure and the wiring of a dyslexic brain is totally different to a non-dyslexic brain. So then you realize, well, why can't dyslexics learn the way a non-dyslexic child learns? Is because their brains are wired up completely different. However, if we teach the dyslexics and the non-dyslexics in the way that the dyslexics can learn, everybody will be able to acquire reading. So if you look at the dyslexic brain, only the front part, the articulation part, the language part, which is involved with meaning, is really larger than a non-dyslexic brain because they overcompensated, because they don't have that vision part of their brain developed for reading. So if we think about, like, what is a word, okay, and how is a word processed in our brain? So there are 3 elements that we've got for a word. we've got its pronunciation. So you think about the word bat, for example. Okay, so you've got the pronunciation of bat. So that's we know how to do. Okay, and then we have the meaning of bat. And that part is our language part of our brain. But then in addition to that, we have the grapheme form is b-actor, makes that, which is the spelling of the word that. And we have to fuse all three elements to form a word, okay, in our brain. So we're going to have a look now at our brain. And what's going on in our brain is we need to be able to connect all those three parts for reading. Okay, so what we've got here is what happens is, okay, we've got something called vision villages. So what happens is your brain sees a word, sees a graph, like graphing, just symbols. And we've got to make sense of those symbols. So what happens is we make a neural pathway to something called sound city. So what a child sees is they first see the words, goes to the back of our brain. Okay, but they've got to make sense of all those, that line and that circle. What is that line in that circle? Oh, it makes the sound B. So that goes, we're creating a neural pathway to sound city. Then, oh, there's a circle and a line. Oh, what is that? Oh, no, that makes an A. Then we have a T. Okay, but now we've got B, A, T. So the next process that a child has to do, and they've got to be able to blend those three sounds together. So we go from the vision, okay, to the sound city, which is part of language, and then we move on to making meaning of that word. Okay, we've got to understand what is a bat. A bat could be a bat that you play cricket with, or it could be a bat that flies. So that's where meaning comes into it. So we've got to be able to create that for children. So as I said before, we are wired up for sound city, and we are wired up for meaning mountains, where we create meaning of the words that we hear, but we are not wired up for vision villages. So that's what we've got to help the children do. Make that connection between the bat, the b-actor, the grapheme, the symbols, that they have individual sounds, and then we've got to teach them how to blend them, and then that attach a meaning to them. Okay, another challenge that we have in teaching children to read is something called mirror invariance. Okay, so that's something we're born with. Okay, so if you look at that chair, okay, the chair that's facing the right, it's still a chair. If you turn it to face another way, it's still a chair. If you turn it upside down to the left, it's still a chair. If you turn it upside down the other way, it's to the right, it's still a chair. So whichever way you put the chair, it's still a chair. It's not going to change. So that's something that children are born with. However, when they start to read, they have to unlearn that mirror invariance that we already have. Because what happens when you've got your V, when you turn it the other way, it becomes a D. And if you turn it upside down, it becomes a P. And then you turn it the other way, it becomes a Q. So what happens with children when they're starting to read and starting to write, we have lots of mirror reversals going on. And a child who's doing this is not necessarily dyslexic. This is what they're trying to, as they're learning to read, they're undoing this mirror invariance that they've got inside of their brain. So when a child is reading and still reversing, it's still normal until the age of 8. After the age of 8, then you'd be concerned. Okay. So how do we make these connections in our brain? How do we make the connections from our visual system to our language system for our children? What practically can we do to help our children? The ideal age to do this is between the ages of 3 and the ages of 8. The ages of 3 is your kindergarten. So those are your pre-reading skills. We have got to make sure that by the time the children get into an age where they have to read, where they have to attach those graphing, so symbols to sounds, they have got, they are very secure with hearing sounds. If a child can't identify orally and hear the sounds in our language, they're going to find it very difficult to be able to read those same sounds. So how are we going to help our children? So the first thing that children learn, the first skill, the vital skill that children learn is phonological awareness. So in kindergarten, this is what teachers should be focusing on with children. And even when I get children older, in their sort of year 4, year 5, year 6, 10, 11, 12, who are struggling with their reading still, the first thing I do is I assess their phonological awareness. I see, can that child, and when I say phonological awareness is a skill that is totally oral. They don't see any words whatsoever. Because as I said to you, we've got to be able to refine what we hear in order to be able to read it. Okay, so what is phonological awareness? Phonological is ability to hear, recognize, and manipulate the very smallest piece of a unit of sound, which is called a phoneme. Now, what are the components of phonological awareness? The first one is syllable awareness. A child has to be able orally, and I'm going to say orally and emphasize that there's no written words in front of them. They've got to be able to identify syllables and words orally in order to be able to do it when they're reading, when they eventually see a word in its written form. So what I do with children, I give them pictures and we start with one syllable words. We do a lot of clapping. So I'll say to them, okay, I model, and then I allow them to do it. So I'll say, okay, how many syllables are there in the word board? Let's clap that. Oh, how many claps did I do? 1. Okay, and how many syllables in the word? And they'll say 1. And with younger children, we say, how many claps? So we're looking at units of sound with children. And this is a vital skill, because when they go into reading, like I had a year 5 child last week, and I have done a lot of work on syllables with her, and she had the word embankment. And she all started and she went and comment. And I said, okay, stop. Let's see how we're going to look at this word again. Try breaking it up into syllables. So she goes, oh, embankment. But I've done so much work with her on looking at pictures and building from 1 syllable to 2 syllable words. Like I'm looking at pictures like carrot, and then moving on to 3 syllable words, computer, and then 4, television, radiator, and clapping that. So we do lots and lots of work with that. So once a child is able to identify orally syllables, we move on to onset and rhyme. Now, what is onset and rhyme? Okay, it's a child's ability to actually hear the rhyme in a word. So for example, if you have the word cat and you have the word bat, but then you have the word cot. Oh, let's just look at this now. So we have at. Okay, and then, oh, okay, let's say cat and dog. So og, do at and og will sound the same. And they're like, no, so cat can't rhyme with dog. So let's try cat and bat. So k, at, b, at. Oh, what sound was on both? What sound played on both my pinky? At. Oh, do they sound the same? Yes, I haven't shown them any word. They haven't seen the word cat, they haven't seen the word bat, but they're listening for the sound Y. So how does that help us with reading? When we go to reading, then in spelling, if a child's able to identify a spelling pattern, then they will find it much easier to spell than to read and to read. So example, so if a child sees the word bright, they know that I-G-H-T says I, and then further down the page, they'll see, oh, light. Oh, I-G-H-T, that rhymes with bright, so it's the same sound. Instead of having to try and work out each individual word, when a child can't, and I've got children who really struggle with identifying spelling patterns, and again, it comes back down to onset and rhyme awareness. They haven't got that secure in their brain. Okay, they will struggle with their reading, and they will struggle with their writing. Because their learning
should be automatic.
There's something with children who aren't struggling readers. Yes, it should be automatic. And once they're taught, it's not going to be, if they haven't learned it, then that's not going to be automatic. Reading is not an automatic skill. It's like playing a musical instrument. It's not an automatic skill. Swimming is not an automatic skill, and reading falls into that same category. Language is automatic because that's what we're wired up to do. But what we're teaching children is a very unnatural process. And then we move on to phonemic awareness, and phonemic awareness is being able to break those sounds into individual components and then blend them, segment them and blend them. And again, I do it all orally. I can show them pictures, or sometimes we just have frames where they've got to put counters in how many sounds they can hear in the counter. So you're going to have the word frog, that will have a frame with 4 sections, and they've got to go r, ah, g, and put it together, frog. Okay, so they're hearing that. We're really tuning these children to be sound sensitive in order to be able to be good readers. So as I said, phonological awareness predicts reading ability. It is the key to success in learning to read. I always say to parents when I'm feeding back on assessment that phonological awareness is the bread and butter of children learning to read. Because as I said, that's the first skill that I test when I'm assessing a child is, do they know their phone, do they have good phonological awareness skills? Often if they don't, then I go into phonics, and often the phonics is very poor. And then after the phonics is very poor, then obviously spelling and then reading will also be very, very poor. Okay, so as I said to you, once we finish with our phonological, the child's got their phonological awareness skills secure, then we can move on to teaching them phonics. We can actually show them the grapheme and phoneme correspondence, the sound and the symbol, putting it together. We can start teaching children, so then they can start seeing all the sounds that they've been hearing. But as I said to you before, if they haven't got that secure, they will struggle with their phonics. Okay, teaching phonics, we start with what we call CVC words, consonant, vowel, consonant. So we teach children how to blend words like d, or g, and then we move on to initial consonant blends, like the word slip. So they've got to be able to go slip, and then our final consonants is band, and then we move on to chunks when we have words like the word bright and right. So it's r, I, t, when we're teaching children, and then we blend those words together. Okay, but then we've got high frequency words. Now, high frequency words, okay, it doesn't matter how much a child tries to phonetically sound them out, you'll never arrive at that word. So you've got the word said, if you go there's no ways you'll ever come to said. But so what I do is I teach children through mnemonics. So we do Sally and our dance, or we have because, big elephants can always use small exits, or Betty eats cakes and Uncle sells eggs, or we have the word laugh, and laugh and you get happy, and and I do this over and over with the kids until it's ready. So we play different reading games with the high frequency words. High frequency words are also very, very crucial part of reading. You've got your phonics and your high frequency words. Okay, handwriting. Handwriting development is crucial. It is very, very important how children form their letters. Some people go, oh, it doesn't really matter, but it does. Because actually they've done research that children who form their letters correctly, it will help their reading. They've done lots and lots of research in that writing is a huge facilitator of learning, as it helps to build that phonological root within the child. Okay, so it's very, very significant because also it helps our visual system also. Handwriting. Okay, now we've got 2 different processes that are going on when we learn to read. There's the decoding, which is taking those words and being able to segment them, break them up into individual sounds, into their phonemes, and then blend them. So a child can manage to do that. But then in addition to that, reading, as I said to you before, the purpose of reading is to understand the message of the person that we're reading about. Okay. So what I want to show you now is a simple view of reading. So this really is very, very crucial, because what this diagram shows us is where children are at in terms of their ability to read. So if you look at the top right-hand side, you've got language comprehension processes, good, and you've got word recognition processes, good. This is your proficient reader. This is your child who is able to decode automatically. They've learned to do this, okay, and they understand what they're reading. This is really where we want our children to be. Then you've got children who've got good word recognition. And so in other words, they're able to segment the words, blend the words together. Okay, but they can read a whole text. I've got children that I teach that can read beautifully, but they really don't understand what they read. Okay, so these are children with comprehension difficulties, and depends on the severity of where the child is at. They might have to be referred on to a speech and language therapist to deal, because it could be a possible alarm bell for a language disorder. So then we've got a child with poor comprehension skills and poor word recognition. So this is your struggling reader. Okay, this is really taking them right back to those phonological skills, building that up and slowly building up on phonics. And then you've got to work on the comprehension also. Then you've got your child who's got poor word recognition, okay, but excellent language comprehension. And that is really where our dyslexics, most of our dyslexics fall into that category. Because what are they doing? They're spending so much of their effort trying to decode, trying to break up those sounds, put them together, that half the time they lose track of what they've read. But if you read the text to them and you ask them, what have you just read, and ask them questions about the text, they will understand what they're doing. So this is really a good graph that really shows us where our children are at and how to remediate the specific difficulties. Next one. Okay. Okay, and next one. You won't have time for that. Okay, so we've got strategies to help our children. What do we do? So even, you know, it doesn't matter what age. This is not for children who are in kindergarten. This is throughout. Because as I said to you, if you've got a child who's 8 years old and they're still struggling to read, their phonological awareness skills are not tuned for reading yet. So we need to go back and work on those skills. So what you can do is when the children are in the car, what you can play is I hear with my little ear, not I spy with my little eye, I hear. So we're looking at sound, we're tuning our children to listen to sound so that they can be prepared to be efficient and proficient readers. Another very good activity to do with your children is reading with them fun books. Dr. Seuss is brilliant because it's got rhyme in it. It's got all like silly stories that children can laugh at and really enjoy with you. So these are the type of manipulation games that I play with the children that I teach you. So I show them a picture of a clip, but you can also do it orally. I'll say to them, okay, look at the word clip. Now take the k away from clip. What's our new word? So this is, again, you cannot see any symbols there. You cannot see any graphemes there. They've got to do it all auditory. They've got to really fine-tune their auditory skills. And then they've got to say lip. And sometimes what I do is I hold the picture, the answer back, and I say, okay, I'll show them the train. I'll say train. What's the first sound in train? And they've got to say to me, t. Okay, let's remove the first sound, and what's the word that we've got left? Rain. And then I show them a picture of rain. Okay. Right, so again, how do we help our children with comprehension? So that's really helping our children fine-tune their sounds. So when you're reading with your children, make sure that you're looking at those 4 categories: predicting, questioning, clarifying, and summarizing. So how do we teach our children prediction? So look at the cover of the book, look at the title of the book. What do you think the book's about? Okay, or what we can do is we can model for the children. Oh, I think, okay, the book could possibly be about a haunted house, because look, it's all very dark and there are broken windows. Or I wonder if this is about something scary that's going to happen in a forest, because if you look at the forest, it's quite dark as well. I imagine that this book is going to be about, and then because. So you model that for the children. Then we can move on to questioning. So your children can ask questions, or you can ask questions. So what I have this little fan that has got all different question words on it. So what you can do is you can read a few lines with your child, and then you choose a question word, or they choose a question word, like who? Oh, who have we just read about in this passage? Or then the next one is the child's turn. Where do you think this is happening in the story? So you share with the child. and then by doing this, you're trying to see whether the child understands what the story is about. Okay, clarifying. Okay, this is a very, very important skill to teach our children. So when they're reading, say to them, oh, you know what, I actually didn't really understand what that word means. What do you think I can do as a reader? So maybe let's read on and see from the context of what I'm reading if I can really understand what has been written, or maybe I can Google it. I don't like dictionaries anymore, but Google it or Siri. Okay, so this is really, and teach our children that, you know what, good readers, okay, they try and find out about words if they don't understand them. So sometimes I have children and I'll read to them, I mean, they'll read to me and I'll say to them, oh, but what does that word mean? And I go, I don't know. I say, well, why didn't you ask me? You know, if you don't know, ask. And then summarizing. What happened in the story? What happened at the beginning of the story? What was the exciting part of the story? Then what happened at the end of the story? And just remember that with our children, okay, reading is a very, very complex skill. It's something that our brains are not born to do. It's something that's very, very unnatural. So just, as I said to you, just had a snapshot of what reading is. As Dr. Sue says, okay, the more you read, the more things you will know. And the more you learn, the more places you will go. So just enjoy reading with your children.
Slide.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, good idea.
The diagram you showed of the two brains and the two centers of the brains of different sizes depending dyslexic or non-dyslexic. Is that a relatively recent way of thinking about how reading patterns work? Or is that something that's long established, that idea of creating those neural pathways?
So because we live in an age today, we can do MRI scans. We are able to understand the brain better. I mean, many years ago, no, they did not understand how the brain works at all. But what is also very interesting, which I didn't mention, but thank you, is that once a child, a dyslexic child, has had intervention or remediation, and they've then done an MRI slide, they've actually seen that those parts of the brain that were inactive, that are, okay, they become active, but never quite the same as a non-dyslexic.
You can encourage the brain to activate or to access parts of the pathways that it doesn't actually.
Correct, but only through specialist help that can happen, and it's proven because they've then done MRIs on the brain after remediation,
So the way
and there
kids
has
are
been
being
change.
taught generally
Right.
doesn't encourage that, obviously, because otherwise it wouldn't
No,
have
because with a
the
dyslexic
same
child, they
struggling
need
to do.
more overlearning and they need more multi-sensory teaching, which there's not enough of that going on in the classroom for the children. That's why I said children who are non-dyslexic could benefit from multi-sensory teaching as much as dyslexics, and they could benefit.
But that's not the
dyslexics.
methodology that's generally.
But that unfortunately is not the methodology that is adopted in the classroom. Yeah,
It's interesting.
it's not what. Yeah.
Is there any research to show that early intervention with dyslexic children will help in their final achievements in that? I.e., if you know that they've got early members of the family, early the patterns in the verbal system more.
And yes, however, really you can't get a true diagnosis of a dyslexic child before the age of 7, because really children shouldn't be in school before 6 turning 7. So generally, I mean, in this country, they used to be very, very strict about not assessing a child before 7, but now they've become a little bit more lax about that, and they do try to diagnose beforehand. But it's not an accurate diagnosis because, as I said to you, like that whole mirror variance, it's still normal until the age of 8, which is something very typical of a dyslexic child to do. So definitely early intervention is vital. And again, if you've got a child in nursery who's struggling to pick up rhyme, who's struggling to hear those syllables already from an early age, that is an indicator that it could be possible. And I think we would start intervention already there on a sort of a phonological level. They should definitely, and it would definitely help them and reduce as I said, the difficulties later on that they have.
Yeah, because you want to intervene earlier rather than later, doesn't socially repress the child. in the
Correct.
environment.
Because the plasticity of the brain is between ages of 3 and 8. After 8, it becomes more difficult to do the remediation. It's not impossible, but it's much more difficult. Okay, over to Stacey.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask something from
Yes,
here?
I was just going to say, anyone else that has questions, well, let's let Stacey get started, and then afterwards we can address questions to both our speakers.
Okay, no problem.
Once Stacey has finished. Thank you so much. That was really seriously very, very interesting and fascinating for me to hear, especially as a teacher, especially that you diagnose at 8, and I never understood why. When I go and nag the Senko or whoever, I see the flags diagnosed already, and I see now you have to wait because we're not ready yet. Anyways, now on to Stacey. Stacey is another person I know really, really well. Also South African. I don't know why we have 2 South Africans here tonight. Started education there and came here. The flyer says Senko of a local school, but I actually had the privilege of having Stacey as my boss for a few years. So I'm going to change that, not just from Senko, but I'm going to say an outstanding Senko. And I think it's safe to say not just a local school, but it's one of the best local schools we have here, definitely to say. Stacey also worked as a speech therapist, a psychologist, occupational therapist.
With those people.
I didn't even know all of these
With
things
those
that you
people.
did, and the list continues. I mean, a friend, guidance, listening ear. I mean, as a boss, you have no idea. Your door's always open, and it's fabulous, and I'm great to be able to share the floor with you again and introduce you. So without further ado, Stacey.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit both to the camera and to the people here. Thank you for the introduction, Gabriella, and I hope, Shlomit, that I don't repeat some things that you've mentioned, but I will try my best to clip over. I'm thinking about reading, and I'm thinking about driving a car. So as adults, we drive cars, we get in, we know exactly when we reverse, where to look, how to do it. And with parking, it comes so naturally to us. But if we think back to when we were 17 and learning how to drive, we had to really think about the mirror, the indicator, the cars and coming along, and the traffic, etc. And that's for children is reading. They're coming into the world. There's letters and words everywhere they go, and they need to all of a sudden learn how to read. And it is, as Schmidt said,
Watching it. Is it good?
She was excellent.
Oh, excellent.
She was really excellent.
please. Sure, Shlomit, you're excellent. So it's really challenging for children to all of a sudden have all of these letters and sounds, and as Shlomit was saying, decoding them, blending them, working them out, and putting them together, not only to read, but to make sense of. And for me, reading is, well, for everybody, reading is a combination of reading, comprehension, understanding, your spelling rules, your punctuation and grammar, your prediction as well, justification of what you read, and building confidence. So I'm going to start with the spelling part. You could just press, that arrow. So similar to what Shlomit said, these are letters that are confused.
I'll do it tomorrow. I'll slice the cake up and put it in the
You want to take some?
I've given her some to take.
Take more than some.
I offered, but she doesn't want.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
don't have to mute.
Yeah, of course. Take a water. Yeah, with pleasure. No.
We are
Bye, darling.
I hope you feel better.
Me too.
See Lily on Saturday night. Yeah. Coming back on Saturday night. And you text me.
Yeah.
I'll text you Sunday
And I'll
night.
try and I'll try and get this to you because she was so interesting.
You haven't had a chance to speak yet.
Okay now.
Yeah.
Okay.
To mute everyone.
So these letters, we think that children confuse them, and we say, oh my gosh, they're dyslexic. But the dyslexia and language difficulties and assessments come, as we spoke about earlier, come when they're a little bit older. These letters are reversals. They're so easy to confuse. It's not really fair to say to children, why have you confused this? What have you done? The letters are really so similar that it can be confusing, but we can learn all of our spelling from our reading. So the meaning of words, when we read, do we know what the words mean? If we have the word giggle in a book, would we help the children to say, oh, giggle is also laugh, or shout is, could be bellow, and we teach through reading. So I'm going to show you by the end of my talk that through almost one sentence, we can get the spelling, the grammar, the punctuation, and everything from one sentence. Synonyms and antonyms, words that are similar, words that are opposite meaning, gender correct form, prince and princess, and rhyme and words, which is a huge part of children's development in their reading, as Shlomit was speaking about, the rhyme onset for the phonological awareness. So from a sentence, we can ask our children so many questions, and we can get so much out of them and teach them so much from there. I'm not going to go into all the spelling patterns, but you can see that there's so much to learn from a text. The vowel sounds, and this would be the order that we would go in from the CBC words into consonant blends at the beginning and at the end of the words, the long vowel sounds. English is such a difficult language, and a lot of children who have got difficulty in their phonological awareness may have excellent memory. And we work on our visual memory and our auditory memory to also help us with reading, as you can see from the words below. Homophones, great conversation around text is learning words with same or similar meaning, same or similar spellings, but different meanings, and that comes up all the time. So from punctuation and grammar, we can learn, this is one of my favorite things. I think it's cut off a little bit from the screen, but I'll read it to you. It's time to eat, children, or it's time to eat, children. Are we eating children, or are we calling our children to eat? And our punctuation has got so much to add to how we speak, how we read, how we understand things, and where it's going. The men might like women, colon. Without her, man is nothing. Women, comma, without a man, comma, is nothing. So you choose what you would prefer. Can you just go back? Sorry. Commas, question marks, all the punctuation, exclamation marks. And the first time I gave this talk, I was the parent helping children read in a school, just as a parent volunteer. And parents had written in their reading book, my child's had this book before, my child knows how to read this book, please can you move my child up? And as parents, we're in such competition. Does little Johnny is he on yellow level already when my child's still on green level? And we want our kids to move on. We want them to excel. We want them to speed up. We want them to be successful and excellent. But sometimes we need to slow down. And with reading, that's one of those things. So they may read fluently. Fantastic. Fluency is one of the things we teach in reading. But are they accurate? Do they understand the meaning of the words? Can they predict what might happen next? Are they aware of what each punctuation mark means? Can they change the verb for another verb? Can they change it for a better verb? What adjective would they use in the sentence? And we really can learn a lot from the text. When we're looking at comprehension, which is a huge part of reading, understanding of reading and reading for meaning, because once the kids can read fluently, great, but we have reading all over our lives, everywhere, recipe books, stop signs in the street, etc. So there's different types of questions. The factual recall questions, the cat sat on the mat, where did the cat sit? He sat on the mat. Very easy, straightforward, the answers in the text. But we're trying to develop our children's minds. And I think that there's universities Oxford universities that interview children, young adults, and they're not interested what you know. They're not interested if you know every fact in the book about the subject that you're learning. They're interested in how your mind works. They're interested in, can you think? Can you think about what may happen if? Is your mind questioning? Is it asking? And that is the essence for me, what we want to teach our children to read. To read, to decode, to sound out cat, fantastic. But we need to develop them further, and that is through questioning. So this story that I've got up here, it's very small, you can't read, you might be able to see the pictures. There's a man sitting at his table with his cat, and he says, "Stop that noise," said Mr. Green. And the lady says, "She just wants some milk," said Mrs. Green. So she goes and pours milk into the jug, and she says, and the narrator says, "But the milk jug was empty." So the next page, Mrs. Green says, "I will go and milk the cow," said Mrs. Green. Now this is one text. There's 4 sentences here. I've got sentences, I've got direct speech, I've got inverted commas, I've got exclamation marks, I've got question marks. I've got capital letters for names. I've got, what jug is it? It's a milk jug, an adjective. I have so much in these 4 sentences. But what I have got, which is fantastic, is the inference that I can use. So I could ask a child, where might Mr. and Mrs. Green live? Well, if you are going outside to milk your cow, to give your cat milk, you probably, live on a farm. And then it can be a whole discussion. Well, if they live on the farm, or how do you know, other than the words, that they live on a farm? What is she wearing that also could tell you? So her Wellington boots, maybe it's muddy, it's definitely winter, she's got a scarf on, and we could talk about how would you dress if you went out to milk the cow? What would you need to do? What would you need to take with you? So the questioning from this small page could really open up a massive discussion and be very, very influential on a child's thinking brain. So we've got all the different questions, the factual recall questions, the summarize the facts. I remember helping my son do his university application on a UCAS form, and it had to be something like 92 lines or 100, I can't remember, 1,000 characters or something like that. So we need to summarize. We have our long story. We need to summarize. We need to give a précis. We need to take out the things that are irrelevant or that are, repeating ourselves. And we can learn that when we say to somebody, "Can you tell me what the main part of the story was? Who are the main characters? What is the main idea?" That is supporting them for future, for summarizing and just picking out the main parts of an incident or story. So the inferential is what I said to you, the where would they live, how do you know that? And opinion and judgment. And that's where we really get our children thinking, and as adults even thinking. How would you feel? Would you like to live on a farm? What would it mean to you? What type of things would you have for breakfast? Probably more regularly than other people. And you could go on and on with questions just from this page. I'm not going to read all of this, but once again, from a text, I've got, he was dressed in red and yellow. I've got, again, inverted commas. I can show how I use the punctuation when speaking. But on the second page, Wilma looked in the horn. "He's hidden the egg in here," she said. The man started to run, but Biff tripped him up. ... And that's what we say. We say ... crash. Well, it's actually ellipsis. Do our children know that? Are we teaching them that? What is the point of it? What is the purpose? It's for suspense. It's for us to think about what you think would have happened before the word, cover the word crash. What do you think might happen? Why have they written it in capital letters? So from one sentence, we can really develop them. And that is what we're supposed to be doing when we read with our children. It's just more examples of the same.
And then these are factual texts, which obviously, as our children go on to secondary school, they have more factual texts, but it's important to teach them the headings, the subheadings, the bullet points, the facts, they're all important. Don't leave them out. I can't tell you how many times I've taught year 6 comprehension and the answers in the subheading, but they've just read the text and they've missed the answer. Clever children who you think are academically able, but they're rushing through it and they want to see it. If it's there, it's for a reason. Okay. So, you know, really how to help the children, read with them, read to them. Sometimes it's a little bit advanced, and so they can't read it themselves. Read to them, talk to them about the story, discuss it with them, think about what might happen next. Working with our children and reading to your children, even when they're older, is really quite exciting. And if you think about, you know, in our community and at Aural, when there's the base program and Chavrutas, that's what the young adults are doing. That's what people who are learning together, they're doing. They're reading to each other, they're decoding, they're finding out, they're investigating, they're studying together. And that's what we should be doing with our children. One thing that Shlomit said that I thought was crucial is, especially if a child is struggling with reading, look at, okay, here's the book, The Big Pancake. So, you know, maybe they don't know how to read the pancake, but you might be talking to them about, we're not trying to test them, we're trying to help them, we're trying to work with them. So I might say, oh, wow, this mum, she's making pancakes, and talk through all the words that may be more difficult for the child, so that when they're reading them from the auditory memory and the pictures, they know what it is. They will learn how to read those words much better. So it's so important to almost look through the pages, especially with small children. They're so curious at the pictures. So I like to, when reading with small children, is go through the whole book, look at all the pictures and tell the story through the pictures. And then we go back and we read and we decode. And I just wanted to end with, somebody once asked me, at what age can you start asking children the inferential questions? The questions of, where might they live on a farm? How do you know? And I said, before they can read. In reception, the children get picture books. And if you've been a parent of a reception child and your child is still on picture books, you feel a little bit sad. You want them to move on. The picture books are unbelievable. From age 2 and 3, you could have a picture of a child sitting on the sand with a sandcastle. You could ask them what weather it is, what season might it be. How do you know? Playing with sand, wearing a swimming costume. What do you need if you go to the beach? So we're trying to develop their mind right from early on, without words even. We can develop the inference, which is so helpful to read and read for meaning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stacey. That was really, really inspiring and very informative, with a lot of skills and tips that I know I'm going to take forward even into the classroom. Like when I read a book, I'm going to, I mean, often I use keywords, but maybe it's what those keywords are the difficult words that are going to be within the text, so that the children are ready what they're going to read. So now is a really good time for questions. If anyone here has any questions, and if anyone online has any questions, so ask my speakers to want to both stand over here so that everyone can see you. I'm going to try and take a look to see what the questions, if there are any questions here. I know someone already asked.
Someone
they
asked teaching two languages.
Yeah, they said, do you think that children should learn to read 2 languages together? And if there are any more questions, please feel free to type them in. I'll stop sharing the screen if I can, so that they're private as well, should you desire. Any questions? Let's start with that question for now.
Reading 2 languages at the same time. I think for a child who struggles with language, it's quite difficult. If it's immersed in a home, I think it's going to be easier. I don't know what you think, Shlomit.
I think it depends on the child. I think if you're talking about a child with learning difficulties, and you know the child's got learning difficulties, I think it's overload if you're trying to read 2 languages at once. It depends on the severity of the difficulty. I often say to parents, let's focus on English, getting them proficient in English, and then we can move on to possibly doing another language. But if you've got a child who doesn't have difficulties, then absolutely they can learn 2 languages. It's actually, they say bilingual children, you know, in terms of the brain, do a lot better than children who, you know, speak 1 language or read 1 language.
Because in Jewish schools, the children do learn to read 2 languages in one together, and a lot of children actually do struggle.
Correct. So it's a problem. It really is a problem. I wish that they would, you know, if the child's struggling in 1 language and all it's doing is really overloading the child, and in terms of their self-esteem, I personally think that it's just, you know, it's not good for their self-esteem, because they feel like they're failing not only in 1 language, but they're failing in 2 languages. And so what I try and encourage parents to do is focus on the English, and then in terms of the if they're doing Hebrew or Kurdish, is rather do it very lightly. Don't focus on that. Let them be in the classroom, and I wouldn't spend hours practicing that at home until the English is proficient. And then maybe for a year they can focus on the English, and then you can, because they're in a Jewish school and they have to do it, then I would focus on the Hebrew as well. But together at once, when a child's got specific difficulties, then I think it's just overload for both children.
I think that's if they have language difficulties. Yeah. If not, then it's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question that's been asked privately to us, so no one can see it. It says, if a child's reading is too advanced for their age, what should we focus on when reading? Is it good to slow them down or work on another aspect?
Well, I would then go on to the punctuation, more synonyms, other words similar to the words that you're using, the prediction, maybe, you know, what would happen next, why, how would you feel if, really hone in on the inferential type questions and justification, rather than move them to another level. It's very important when children are academically able not to push them onto the, with reading and books, you know, we do want to develop and encourage them to read, but it's best to develop them laterally than
we do like book reviews after they've read it once or twice. Then we say to them, we want to renew the book. We're like, let's see how much you really do know and understand. And we get their book reviews to do it and say, look, and we do it that way. You'd see really if they did understand.
Absolutely.
I think it's a very hard mentality in our day and age to slow children down.
We're not slowing them down,
because
we're just
you're
making
not,
them
but in their minds, I feel like children think that you're just slowing them down. And in the age of, I'm going to blame technology, but I'm not even blaming technology. I'm saying it's just a now generation. Children just want things instantly, and they just want to move on and get on with it. They don't want to slow down and break things up anymore.
But I think, for, you know, for a parent, you would discuss it from a teacher's perspective. You would say, okay, well, let's look at, highlight all the words that are somebody's spoken words. How do you know that the direct speech? Have a look at that. Oh, you've seen this punctuation mark, and you think of a sentence where that punctuation mark would be valid. So you're actually, you're broadening them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't want to go back anymore. It's done, move on. They just want the next. They want to carry on. You said it's a lot of the parents as well. I find the children as well. Personally, I have people in class that uses a C-touch pen to help them to read. It's a special pen that you go along and then it tells them back the sentence. And they've actually stopped using it because they don't have the patience to scan it and wait and listen. They still want an adult, which is very annoying and frustrating. They want someone to read it now. They don't want to wait. And I feel it's the same with a lot of this. Decoding it, but we've got to teach them that, and it's showing just how important it is. Are there any other questions? If you don't want to shout out, you can write them privately.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you both so much. At what age do I don't know if it's children or young adults learn to scan? In other words, they read not every single word, but they read by scanning the page, and then they kind of,
Photogenic reading. I know exactly what you mean.
yeah.
But it's like picking out the main points.
I don't
When you
think
read a
it's
book, for
specific
example,
age. I think
you
it's
don't read
more-
every single word. You scan the page with your eyes and you take information.
I think it's more of an ability rather than an age, because you get children who are proficient readers at age sort of 7 and 8, and they're starting to do that already.
Right.
So I think that I don't think we can pinpoint a specific age, but rather where's the child at in terms of their ability, in terms of their as a
So it's the
proficient reader.
ability of their
Reading
reading
skills.
skills to do that.
Yeah.
I got told at year 6 about that. I remember specifically my teacher telling me that either you read the middle, all the middles, or you read the beginning and
That's
end,
why
the
I'm
beginning and end.
Because I teach.
And that technique I got told about and got mentioned to me in year 6.
No,
And
the
I
reason why
remember
I
it.
asked you that question is I teach much older students than you teach.
Mm.
And you can have a very, very able student, and when they're doing the exam questions, they do very badly, and that's because they don't read the question word for word. They scan. Right, and so they miss quite like clues or pieces of information from actual parts of the question.
But from the book.
We train them to actually read every single word of the question. And I was just wondering if this is something that kids are taught to do, to scan,
I don't
or
think
whether it's something they just
no.
develop that as a skill themselves, and they need to be untaught
Yeah.
it in a way.
I don't think taught.
No.
But I mean, there is that in high school of skim reading to try and get the main points.
But it's high school, not primary
Yeah.
school.
Thank you.
Anyways, thank you both so
very
much,
much.
and thank you all. Hope you'll have a lovely.
I get it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Okay.